The ticket seller informed me the next train was departing from platform 1. As you pass through the gates onto the one and only platform, instantly the joke could be seen. The Gulflander leaves Normanton on Wednesdays of each week for the journey to Croydon. The service is still part of the Queensland railway system, but it's isolated by hundreds of kilometres from the rest of the state's main lines. The station master had already called "all aboard," and half a dozen passengers climbed into the 2 carriages. I also made my way to the front carriage. The driver was the same bloke who sold me the ticket, and also the one that called "all aboard." Now he had taken charge of the train. Once we were underway, the driver started telling us the history of the service. The local cattle stations along the track depend on the rail system to bring them supplies during the wet season, this being the only form of transport that can move when the rains come. He also went on to talk about the problems that occur when cattle stray onto the lines. The train stopped a few times for sightseeing, once to let the passengers film as the vehicle crossed a small bridge. Maintenance of the track is kept to a minimum, as white ants have trouble eating into the concrete sleepers, a problem other rail services in other parts of the state were constantly having to deal with. I filmed myself taking the controls of the Gulflander as the driver explained all the instruments. Another stop was a siding called Blackpool, which is a local homestead.
Alright, we'll have 10 minutes spell here. Get out and have a walk around, or if you'll find a tree or whatever.
The station children were waiting with drinks and cakes they had made for the tourists. Everybody took advantage of the offering. It must have been a good way to make some extra pocket money for the youngsters. For the next leg of the journey, I joined the guard in the rear of the train. It took about 5 hours to travel the 159 kilometres to Croydon. At the end of the trip, the train went through a number of sidings and loop tracks to finish up facing the right way for the return journey. In 1885, gold was discovered near Croydon, and the mineral provided a major boost for the whole of the region, including Normanton. Gold has a way of attracting people from a variety of cultures, including Chinese. In fact, people from all over the world flock to this part of Australia for the short-lived gold rush. The railway line we had just travelled on was completed in 1889. It brought a large influx of people and wealth to northwestern Queensland. It took about 5 hours to travel the 159 kilometres to Croydon, where we left the train and ventured into the township. The passengers were to remain in town overnight and return the next morning. Everybody else chose to stay at the local pub. I couldn't afford the accommodation, so I made my way to the local caravan park and booked in for the night. The park was empty and any spot was mine for the taking. During my stay in town, I checked out some of the buildings. I found this old shop in the main street, and it instantly grabbed my interest and took some photos. Not much else was happening in town, so I made my way to the club hotel and ordered a meal and spent the rest of the evening drinking at the bar and talking to the locals and other travellers who had made the journey from Normanton by train. Late that night, I staggered back to camp. Unfortunately, a nearby generator kept me awake for most of the night. The next morning, we were back on the train heading west. The driver stopped the train a few kilometres out of town to give the passengers a chance to wander around the now abandoned diggings. After the last stop, I decided to ride in the second carriage, which I had to myself. It was a long trip back to Normanton, and the scenery held little interest, so I moved around the carriage as I got bored staying in one spot too long.